We're ready to go ahead and do our second and final and wrap-up panel for today's program. This is one I've really been looking forward to, actually, which is the opportunity for me to sit down and have a discussion with two people who are, I think, clearly acknowledged experts in the energy field and are going to be great people to talk about what some of the more recent federal regulatory developments have been with respect to transmission. I may go over into some legislative stuff as well, but I know both of these people have experience in that arena too. And probably couldn't get two better folks to come in and talk about this than our two panelists who, my guess is everybody in this room already knows who they are, but I'm going to do just a brief introduction nonetheless. We have Rich Glick, who's the former FERC chairman, and is now the one of the principals for GQ New Energy Strategies. Rich has a long history in the energy area, having worked both in the private and the public sector up on the Hill and in the regulatory arena. So he's got a tremendous perspective. He's also been an integral player in so much of what we in the industry have been dealing with for the last couple of years. So really looking forward to hearing Rich's perspective on some of these issues. In addition, we have Jeff Dennis, an old friend of mine. Jeff, I feel like I've known you since the beginning in terms of your legal career. Similarly, Jeff has had extensive experience in increasingly responsible positions at FERC, in the industry. You were in a law firm for some period of time. You were back in the solicitor's office for a period of time. You've been up on the 11th floor, which is where the commissioners reside at FERC. You've been a general counsel for a trade association. And now Jeff is back in government in his current position as Deputy Director for Transmission Development for the Grid Development Office at DOE. So join me in welcoming both of our two panelists today, and I really look forward to the discussion that we're going to have. This is basically designed as a fireside chat. I want to talk to them about some of the issues that have been going on. And then, as you can see, I have the Wires crystal ball here, which we're going to ask them to, not literally, but gaze into and think ahead to what are we going to see over the course of the remainder of this year and into the very beginning of next year, because that's what we're all wringing our hands over right now. And fortunately, both Rich and Jeff are going to respond to all of our questions on that. I'm going to have a discussion for probably about 20 minutes or 30 minutes with them, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience for your questions. So again, just like when I talked to Commissioner Clements, start thinking about what you would like to ask Rich and Jeff about what's happening on the regulatory front with respect to transmission. And I'm going to start it off. Jeff, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to ask if you can talk a little bit about some of the recent developments at DOE, like the $1.3 billion that was just allocated for certain regional projects. The DOE just put out an announcement about its National Transmission Needs Study. How do these items and then some of the other more recent developments at DOE fit into the bigger picture about how we're going to meet the country's overall transmission needs in the years ahead?
Sure, yeah, well, thanks for inviting me. And yeah, we do go back. Larry, everyone should know, was an early mentor for me when I was a baby lawyer at FERC. So thank you for that. Yeah, so it's been a busy couple of weeks. We had a big announcement on Monday. I brought back a sunburn to prove it from Arizona, where we announced both the finalization of the transmission needs study as well as the selection of our first 3 projects from the transmission facilitation program. And you know, when you combine those with a couple weeks earlier, we announced awardees for the Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnerships grants. Many of those were big transmission projects. I really think it represents some of the most significant federal investments we've seen in transmission, and combined with the needs study, it really, you know, and I'm kind of parroting Commissioner Clements now, but it really is an unprecedented focus for the department on the national transmission system and our ability to deploy a variety of tools to help deploy transmission. looking at GRIP, right, we heard some of this earlier. Several major transmission investments, support for JTIQ, the 5 projects along the MISO SPP seam. That's a almost $500 million federal investment that's going to lever up multiples of that in terms of private investment. When it comes to the transmission facilitation program, we made a commitment to sign up to $1.3 billion worth of capacity contracts. So to be an anchor customer on those projects, that'll lever up more than $3 billion in private investment and bring with it 3,500 or 3.5 gigawatts or 3,500 megawatts, however you want to think about it, of new capacity that's going to meet multiple needs in the regions. So I think all of those things are really demonstrating just an unprecedented federal commitment to expanding the transmission grid. The transmission needs study, we can talk more about it as we go on. I sort of won't belabor. And Commissioner Clements is more familiar with the numbers than I am. I think she had a lot of them at her fingertips. But I'm excited about having that out because it really is an opportunity for us at DOE to really set forth a vision of what's needed and to focus everybody, industry, policymakers, planners, utilities, other stakeholders, on where investments are needed and where those investments will provide significant value to customers. And I think that's really one of the biggest things. I mean, obviously the needs study does a lot of other things, right? It's a precursor to national interest electric transmission corridors. We can use it to guide some of our funding. But I think more than anything, it's a large-scale assessment from a variety of data sources that paint a picture about what our national grid needs are, and that I hope will allow us to have a focused conversation.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Rich, you are probably one of the most ambitious chairmen in terms of your agenda on transmission items in particular during your tenure. I don't know about anybody else. I'm still exhausted, frankly, from all of that stuff that was put out by the commission. We just heard a panel talking about the final rule on one of those items, Order 2023, the generator interconnection rule. But there are quite a few others that are still sitting out there that the commission is either working on or we're waiting to hear some resolution from them. What do you think the obstacles are to commission action on those items going forward? What do you think are the prospects for FERC action on them anytime in the near future?
Well, when you said ambitious, the first thing I thought of was there are a lot of ambitious FERC chairmen. That's how people get there, I guess. But in terms of the work, you're exactly right, Larry. There are a ton of items that FERC had set out that I think the commission is still working on that still need to be addressed. To address this whole conundrum, there was a really good discussion in the panel before about Order 2023 and interconnection. That's a big part of it. But transmission planning and cost allocation, there's a proposed rule that's still pending at the commission on that. That is, and as discussed by the previous panel, that's an incredibly important part of this whole transition to the clean energy future. But even beyond that, the commission has a number of initiatives that it hasn't really released in terms of proposed rules yet, for the most part, but is certainly considering interconnection, I should say transfer capacity, interregional transfer capacity. I think there's a study being done by NERC now as a result of some legislation, but there's still a lot of focus at FERC. Is FERC going to issue some sort of order requiring a specific amount of interregional transmission transfer capacity between at least the jurisdictional regions, the regions that FERC has jurisdiction over. There is cost containment. Cost containment is an incredibly important issue in terms of if we're going to be building a lot of transmission, there's a lot of concern about the cost and the impact on consumers. Commissioner Clements and Commissioner Christie in particular have spoken about it quite often. I think the commission still has an open docket on that. In addition to that, there's transmission incentives. Is the commission going to move forward with a transmission incentives rule or not in terms of both incenting transmission but also revising or reconsidering some of its other transmission policies, and there's other initiatives as well. The point being is that there's a lot to be done. Toward 2023, why a major milestone is just a small part of, I think, what's going to be a larger transmission effort. Now, I think you were asking what are the barriers? Why are those issues not being addressed yet? First of all, incredibly complicated. When I was at the commission, we first put out a NOPR, a notice of proposed rule on transmission planning and cost allocation. And the reason we did it is because it was the hardest. And I thought the best thing to do was at least come out with a proposal and try to see if we can work together a compromise on that, get comments coming in and get people talking about it. But at the same time, interconnection reform, which isn't easy, but that was something a little bit easier, and I think the Commission was able to get that out recently on a unanimous vote, and I think that's a major milestone as well. But these issues are incredibly complicated. Lots of lots of comments filed by the Commission, by stakeholders. There's been a number of technical conferences and other Commission public forums on those as well, and I think it's just going to take a little bit of time. Secondly, and I think this is there's a lot of uncertainty. I think people recognize at FERC, and I wasn't here for Commissioner Clements. I don't know if she talked about it or not, but as everyone knows, there's 4 commissioners right now. At the end of the year, there could be 5, there could be 4, there could be 3. Hopefully, there'll be at least 3, right? And don't want to repeat what happened back in 2017. And I think they have to see which way the Commission is going to go on that in terms of makeup, in terms of moving forward with these major initiatives. If you have new commissioners, it's going to take some time to get them up to speed. If you have if you have just 3 commissioners, or if Commissioner Danley comes back and if he comes back, I think there would be 5 commissioners. They would certainly pair him with somebody else. The point being is that if there's someone new, it's going to take some time to get someone up to speed. If there's not someone new, you have to reconfigure right now they're thinking, how can I get something by with 4 commissioners? How can I get 3 votes? Not that you don't want to try for unanimity, but if you can't get unanimity, how you can get 3? Now, if you only have 3 commissioners at the end of the year, you have to start thinking, how can I get at least 2 votes? And that changes the dynamics as well. So I think people are kind of waiting to see how that plays out.
What's your take on Order 2023? I'm not going to do a Nina multiple choice thing necessarily, but are you happy? Are you disappointed? Somewhere in between? What's your reaction to what the Commission did on the final rule?
I mean, generally supportive. I think when I was there, and in terms of the proposed rule and then the final rule that came out, it's not that dissimilar. And I think that we realized at the time when we moved forward with the proposed rule that it wasn't the panacea. It wasn't going to solve all the problems. That certainly, hopefully, it was going to expedite the process, but the process still had other changes still need to be made to the interconnection process around the country. And you're seeing that. You see that in MISO, you see that in California ISO and PJM and elsewhere. Either they've put forward proposals or they're working on proposals right now to go much further, I think, than Order 2023 does. Nonetheless, it has some very positive elements, and that one in particular is, and this was discussed a little bit on the previous panel, is there's a recognition that it's a problem on both sides of the equation, right? So for instance, you certainly need to deal with speculative projects, and you have to increase fees, increase requirements when entities are filing for queue positions, but at the same time recognizing that transmission owners and transmission providers also have an equal responsibility in terms of meeting deadlines. And I think that you could argue whether the penalties are significant or not, but the fact that the first time that the Commission actually established penalties for transmission providers that don't meet the particular deadlines for various studies that have to be performed, I think is significant because, again, it demonstrates that both sides are going to have to put more effort, put more resources into this to really make the interconnection process work.
And then I just want to do one more follow-up on the different items that are still hanging out there. What do you think of those items are going to be the most impactful? I assume you would think the regional transmission planning and cost allocation one, but after that, correct me if I'm wrong, but after that, what do you think of those items that are out there? What's going to be the most impactful that you think the FERC should focus on trying to get done?
Well, I think all of them, not that they're all going to be done at the same time, but I think they're all important pieces to the bigger pie. Looking at your crystal ball, I think we'll talk a little bit later about the prospects, but I would say certainly if you took planning and cost allocation out of the equation, saying that's certainly the most important, I think everyone would agree on that. To me, possibly interregional transfer capacity. Now, Congress has been dabbling in it. From my perspective, it's not necessarily a positive thing for Congress to legislate on that issue, at least specifically, because it's very difficult to figure out how much is needed between regions and who should pay for the costs and where the project should be located and so on. But I think we had a FERC NARUC task force, transmission task force, everyone's aware of. One of the meetings was on interregional transfer capacity, and it struck me as really interesting that there was almost consensus, certainly consensus among the states and mostly consensus among the FERC commissioners that something needed to be done on that, and it's vitally important from a reliability perspective, from this transition perspective that we're in, and I think Certainly the study that DOE came out with recently demonstrates that as well. It was 114% or something extra transfer capacity is needed. So point being is I would rank that as second, but I think they're all important enough that they should be addressed.
I want to turn now to another big challenging area with respect to transmission, which is permitting and siting. I want to ask both of you, I'll start with you, Jeff, though. What do you see happening either at DOE or at FERC or up on the Hill on Congress that could either wind up streamlining or expediting the permitting and siting process? Realistically, what do you think may wind up happening in terms of possible legislation along those lines? Curious as to what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really weigh in on legislation from my current position. I mean, obviously we know Congress is having a conversation, and like agencies do, we provide technical input when asked from time to time. And of course we know FERC, it has a pending rule on its own sort of backstop role. What we're doing at DOE is kind of recognizing, as you all know, that this is a multifaceted, kind of multi-jurisdictional challenge, and trying to apply tools that we have in our existing authority to address all of those tools. So, starting really with the federal government, right? We know that projects that need multiple federal permits, that can be a significant source of delay, particularly in the West. And so we have authority in the Federal Power Act, Section 216H. It's been there since the Energy Policy Act of 2005 for the department to take a coordinating role, coordinate among the multiple federal agencies on a project, set binding schedules to complete environmental reviews, and prepare a single environmental impact statement for all agencies to rely on in making their own decisions. So we actually issued a rulemaking in August to kind of restart and strengthen that program. And comments closed in October, and we're working on finalizing that now. And we think that is a significant opportunity to help improve permitting and siting outcomes. At the state and local level, Congress also gave us a grant authority in the Inflation Reduction Act, $760 million that we can use to help states with perform their own states or other local siting authorities perform siting activities, kind of bolster their own processes. And we can also use those grants to provide economic development opportunities in local communities that are impacted by transmission, right? It's an effort to help make sure that transmission benefits are shared broadly, and really to get local communities to yes and make sure that they are benefiting from these projects. So that's another opportunity we have. And then of course, finally, we have a role in the whole federal backstop authority in terms of designating national interest electric transmission corridors. And as folks know, we're working on restarting that program as well in a more focused way than the department has done in the past, really relying on applicants to bring us proposed corridors for us to consider to kind of help guide our discretion. So I can say for certain that DOE will be moving forward on all of those things. That certainly doesn't get in the way of we don't think that gets in the way of the conversation that Congress is having, but it's just really trying to use the authorities that we have to make progress.
All right, well, Jeff, you get a pass on talking about legislative prospects, but Rich, you don't have a current position that prevents you from doing that. So, and given your background also up on the Hill, what do you think are the prospects for anything legislatively happening with respect to either permitting and siting? And then separate from that, is there anything FERC should be thinking about doing? They haven't seemed particularly enthusiastic about using backstop siting authority too much. I mean, I know that's a potential tool in the tool chest, but is there anything else they should be thinking about?
So if I could just start with the second point, which is backstop siting authority, because I think, there have been, a lot of people have suggested, I've heard that FERC's not enthusiastic about it. I don't think it's enthusiasm or not. I think obviously we need to wait to see how the process works. They're still in rulemaking form, both in terms of DOE and FERC, before that gets going. I publicly said when I was at FERC, and I still believe this, it's unclear to me how many people are going to avail themselves, how many companies are going to avail themselves of the backstop authority, especially if you're a regulated utility, or you're going to want to tell FERC to preempt your state. Your state's going to take it out on you, right, in terms of rate making or something. It doesn't mean there aren't independent transmission companies and so on, and merchant transmission companies that might think about using that authority. But I think overall, it's not the panacea I think some people had originally expected it to be. in terms of the prospects for federal legislation, first of all, I think there's a pretty good argument to be made that FERC should have some sort of additional authority similar to what it has in terms of natural gas pipelines. And there's, it's kind of interesting that there had seemed to be some life to this notion on Capitol Hill not that long ago. I think that seems to be petering out somewhat. A large part it has to do with just obviously the dysfunctionality that's occurring on Capitol Hill on everything. But secondly, the partisanship with which we see people look at transmission, which is really strange, right? Because it used to be, I think not that long ago, even when I was on the Hill the second time, I think Republicans supported transmission development more than Democrats did, I think, at least on Capitol Hill. And now it seems to be reversed in large part because I think there's a reaction that if Democrats think we should do something for transmission, there's a natural reaction among some Republicans that we shouldn't do anything about it. And vice versa. I don't want to be fair. It's not like an only Democrat, it's not only a Republican problem, it's a Democratic problem too. I think, so I don't think in the short term, given everything going on Capitol Hill right now, and I can't see the House passing anything in the near term, at least until the elections next fall, anything of substance beyond funding for the government, hopefully. But down the road, I think there is that trade-off that people are still talking about, or further reforms under NEPA, other siting reforms, other federal agencies, for instance, the Clean Water Act and Section 401 or 404 authority. I keep on forgetting the two, but I think there are items on the table that you could see a compromise worked out among Democrats and Republicans, because there are, especially in the Senate, a lot of Democrats that really do want to give FERC more permitting reform. But again, it's hard to imagine that happening before the elections in 2024.
Yes.
Rich made an important point about NHTSA corridors too that I wanted to emphasize, which is that they were created to give FERC this backstop authority, but the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act have also made them have a different flavor, which is we can also use them to help direct some of our funding. For example, the transmission facilitation program, public-private partnerships can be used in those corridors. And Congress also gave the department additional loan authority for projects in the national interest in those corridors as well. So, I think these corridors are another opportunity for us to kind of focus on key areas of need, so they're not just a matter of backstop authority anymore. And I think that's important.
I want to follow up on something you said earlier, Rich, which is you mentioned the seeming increasing politicization around transmission, and that's definitely an area, at least in my mind, that is a growing concern as well. But I do think at least in one area where we're not maybe seeing quite as much of that is in the reliability arena. And we're now only just maybe a couple of months past the 20th anniversary of the 2003 blackout. And I'm curious as to what both of you think are some of the greatest reliability challenges that we still see facing the transmission system today. And in connection with those, Jeff, what at DOE is underway to deal with those types of issues and concerns? And Rich, what do you see FERC doing in that area, either currently or maybe they should be doing in the future? So either one.
Well, I would say, to me, I think the biggest need that I see that we have, and the National Transmission Study really shows this, right, is the need for more interregional transfer capacity. And where you really see that providing a huge benefit and resolving a huge need is in extreme weather scenarios. When you look in the study, one of the things that you see is one of the data sets we use to analyze both current need as well as future need we use this was for current need. We looked at wholesale price differentials, right? And those are driven in large measure by these extreme events where you see big price separations. And that's where these events are hurting consumers, certainly in the wallet, but also they really are becoming increasing reliability concerns. And so that's why you're seeing the department, when we look at things like a transmission facilitation program, like a grid resilience and innovation partnership program, and all of our other tools, we're looking very carefully at how those tools can be used to help increase interregional transfer capability, because all the data that we've analyzed just shows a huge need in that area.
So, first of all, it's interesting to me that, about a year and a half ago, it was all cybersecurity all the time. We were all talking cybersecurity and concerns about whether it be Russia or some other nation state or just some hackers. And that's still a major concern, right? It hasn't gone away. It just doesn't seem to be as much in the lexicon as it was in the past. And instead, it's been replaced by, we're in this transition to a clean energy future, and therefore the sky is falling and we're going to have catastrophic outages. And I don't want to downplay that there aren't substantial challenges, because there are, associated with, whether it be on resource adequacy or whether it be on inverter-based resources. And FERC recently issued a final rule on that in terms of addressing some of the reliability issues associated with that type of technology. But I think Jeff had it exactly right, and I think this is where FERC's responsibility comes in. Beyond the typical working with NERC on reliability standards are very important. For instance, we learned from Winter Storm Uri that if power plants weren't sufficiently weatherized, and I think that was both FERC and NERC have taken some action since then. And there's a number of other actions related to natural gas pipeline reliability that I know we're not a natural gas crowd, so I won't bring up. But on the electric side, and again, Jeff had it exactly right, transmission, I think, is one of the major tools by which we're going to hopefully address some of these reliability concerns, interregional transfer capacity. And again, I don't need to go over what happened in Winter Storm Uri and Winter Storm Elliott, but those are two very recent examples of, if you had more transmission capacity, it wouldn't have solved everything. There were other challenges, but it would have reduced the cost impact. And you go to Kansas right now and ask people, did Winter Storm Uri affect them? It's ridiculous how much they're paying right now as a result of what happened 2 years ago. And obviously impacts on life as well. So I think that's going to be the key focus from a FERC perspective on that issue.
So we talked a little bit about permitting. We've mentioned briefly the planning rule. I'm going to move to the other one, which is paying for all of the transmission that we're looking at over the next couple of decades. It's been a major area of focus, certainly for FERC, but also for DOE as well. FERC is currently looking at cost allocation in the context of the ongoing proposed rule as well. I know DOE has funding programs that can address certain aspects associated with transmission. Jeff, can you talk a little bit, what should we know about those DOE funding programs and opportunities that are out there that could affect or maybe address some of the cost issues around transmission development? And then what do you see as FERC's next steps in this arena?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say a few things. One important thing to know about our transmission funding is that much of it isn't in the nature of grants. I mean, obviously the Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership Program, transmission projects can apply, and we've funded some, and those are like really where we provide grants that buy down the cost. But by and large, the programs they're things like revolving funds or loans where the department ultimately has to be repaid in order to recycle that money and do it again. For those programs, I think where we see it helping reduce the cost is really on the financing side. It helps reduce the cost of financing the project and reduce, frankly, the time it takes to acquire customers, in that development cycle, and that helps with the overall cost of the project, right? Like when we sign a capacity contract as an anchor customer, we help speed up that development cycle and ease the ability of additional financial backers as well as additional customers to come onto the project. So that's certainly one thing that's helpful. I think also the work that we're doing in the planning area, we haven't really talked about things like the National Transmission Planning Study or the offshore wind transmission planning studies that we've done. Those are focused on reducing long-term costs by identifying optimized solutions, right? An optimized offshore grid or an optimized interregional options that can help lower overall cost to consumers over time as we engage in this massive build-out we know we need.
Rich, what do you think on the FERC side?
So first of all, this, the three barriers people always talk about: planning, permitting, and paying for it. This is the cost allocation. To me, it's definitely the most difficult of the three barriers in terms of getting transmission built. And from my perspective, when I was at FERC, we talked about this a lot, is that I always thought that you can't, if you don't have the states on board, you're not going to get the transmission project built. So if they're not on board with cost allocation, they're either going to figure out a way to block it through permitting, or they're going to figure out another way to get in the way if they think their customers are going to take more of a hit than they should compared to what other customers in a certain region are. So the MISO example, which is now we have two examples in MISO where the states got together, essentially negotiated out the cost allocation approach, really should be the model for how things are done, if they can be done. The question is what happens if the states can't agree. And so FERC in the NOPR on planning and cost allocation put forth kind of a new approach, basically saying the states would get the first, states in a region would get the first opportunity to put together a cost allocation approach, either ex post or ex ante cost allocation. If they can't agree, then the FERC NOPR was silent on that. And I think obviously that's a detail that has to be worked out before a final rule is implemented. You would think that the backstop would be FERC, but still that begs the question about how to approach cost allocation in a better way. And I think, that there's a fight, there's disagreement among commissioners just based on public statements about how you identify benefits. Not only who the beneficiaries are, but which benefits should you count, which benefits should you not count, and how do you obviously monetize certain benefits are easier to monetize than others. And so those are real barriers that have to be overcome before FERC goes forward with the final rule. I would say that that's going to be, in my opinion, from the outside, I'm not allowed to talk to FERC about this, and I don't, that's going to be the most difficult issue among the commissioners to agree on how they're going to approach cost allocation for regions, in terms of how regional planning, what kind of cost allocation mechanism they're going to use.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and pause with my questioning and turn it over to the room to see if anybody has any questions. And I see Christina right there, front and center with her hand up.
Thank you both so much for joining us today. I have a question. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Well, again, I might not get invited back if you do make another question. So as two folks who used to work at FERC and have a lot of experience there, I'm curious as to, and who want to see transmission getting built, how do you reconcile the measures that are being worked on to promote transmission building and concerns around how cost containment could impede building? I mean, certainly everybody wants to make sure that it's well planned, it's well built, it's well coordinated, and all of that. But you can see there's a bit of a tension between, as a way to kind of throw up roadblocks in the way of getting things built well.
Well, that question certainly won't prevent you from being invited back again, so go ahead.
So, if I could just start on that. I think that, first of all, we have to recognize that we're talking huge price tags for the kind of transmission that needs to be built to get there, and that's something every regulator, whether they be federal regulators or state regulators, need to think about. And there's a lot of concern among state regulators in particular about that potential. But also, I think this is wires, and everyone I think knows the argument, and the argument is true, that if you build more transmission at the end of the day, over the long term, you're actually saving consumers more money, not to mention the other benefits of having reduced congestion, but also in terms of reliability benefits. But you're saving consumers money by reducing congestion alone. I think the problem is, and this obviously, is there's a short-term and long-term issue. In the short term, you're talking about billions of dollars. In the long term, those savings might happen over 15, 20 years. And how do you translate that for consumers? I think that's why FERC has had a technical conference on this issue and really is trying to explore it. Commissioner Christie threw out an idea that's kind of interesting about formula rates. I'm not sure how you would implement that at FERC. Commissioner Clements might have had different approaches. Those were the two that were most active on in that particular docket. But I would find it hard to believe that FERC would go forward on transmission cost allocation and planning and just put aside and never do anything on cost containment. Something has to be done on that. I would also say just quickly, the existing, putting aside future and changes to FERC regional planning and all that kind of stuff and how much that might cost in terms of developing new transmission. The current approach to transmission planning is there's really a lack of regulation. That's what I think the commission found in the technical conference we had. There's a lack of regulation in certain regions of the country with regard to some of the projects that are being planned now, there's not an ability, either by FERC because of formula rates and so on, or by the states because of jurisdiction, to take a look at whether the kind of transmission that's being planned and developed now outside of the regional planning processes are actually prudent and effective from a cost perspective. So I think this issue is going to have to be addressed regardless of the transition.
Yeah, and my answer is much the same in terms of, you have to think about the total bill, right? And like we unbundled the total bill in 88 for really good reasons, but you have to go back and kind of consider that, and much of the transmission. So like if you look at our needs study, for example, right, the way we projected future needs was we did what the utility industry has been doing for a long time, which is we looked at publicly available capacity expansion models. And we made some assumptions about what the future would look like through those models. And then we said, what are the most cost-effective outcomes? And what the most cost-effective outcomes for consumers was spit out transmission as some of the solution, right? So making sure that I think that we're articulating that this is part of a holistic planning effort, and that we make sure that we are engaging in that kind of holistic planning that finds the most cost-effective results for consumers. Because I do think that we have to engage in that and not simply say to consumers, transmission's a really good thing and you got to pay for it. Transmission provides multiple benefits. It accesses low-cost generation. It resolves costly congestion, and it's part of sort of a total solution for customers. That's certainly how I think about it, and I think that's how we're deploying a lot of our tools, is to find those cost-effective, high-value options for consumers. And then hopefully through our analytical efforts, those will get picked up in the industry planning processes and other things and lead to those cost-effective outcomes.
Another question?
Hi, Margaret Neves from Power Engineers. This question is on the DOE GRIP grants. And I'm wondering, for the next round of grant funding, assuming that all projects that are shortlisted hold equal weight, is there any thought given to looking at the location so that the next round of funds is sort of away from the areas where the round one funds went to, so that the funds are going across the region?
That's a hard one for me to answer right now, because we're kind of, the office is working on getting a second round out there, and it'll develop a funding opportunity announcement that will have review criteria in it that will guide people to certain objectives. I mean, what I can say is that, transmission will be a part of it, and will be a focus, as will, I expect, reconductoring and advanced transmission technology. I think that will be a focus as well, but kind of beyond that top line, probably obvious answer, I can't really get into specifics until the FOA comes out. Sorry about that.
Matthew Crosby, Cypress Creek. Thanks again to both of you. I was curious on the topic of cost containment about sequencing of how needs are identified. I think one of our main concerns is that FERC could issue a very strong planning order, which we are very much hoping that they do, and it involves long-term planning assumptions and requirements, and yet shorter-term reliability planning sort of continues to persist in sort of a separate track. And if you allow those reliability needs to be met, that sort of dilutes the value of avoiding those needs in long-term plans. So it wasn't directly in the NOPR, I think, that was issued, but it's certainly something that we are concerned about. And I'm just wondering if you have any comments on how that can be addressed.
So I think that the goal, and whether I don't know if we'll see if the final rule, but the goal, and you're right, it's not discussed specifically in the NOPR, is that if your planning process is working right, maybe not in the immediate short term, but eventually you're going to end up identifying projects that over the long term are going to negate the need for some of the reliability planning, the local, or I forget, and I know it's different in different regions what it's called, but some of the emergency replacement projects and things like that come up. I think you're going to have those eventually on occasion, but for the most part, if you plan better, you're eventually going to negate that. I think that the concern is, you're right, in the short term, you have kind of competing processes, and and that's what I mentioned about cost containment and oversight. I do think there's a lack, at least in certain regions of the country, there's a lack of sufficient oversight in terms of that kind of reliability type planning. And that actually, again, sometimes leads to the wrong or the less efficient project being built. I don't know. My guess is, and I'm just, it's a wild guess, is that's probably not going to be addressed in the final rule. I think the hope is, again, eventually that'll be replaced by a more robust long-term planning process.
Do Barbara, then Peter. Okay.
Great, thank you, Barbara Tyron. Rich, you mentioned the importance of states, and that's certainly very, very true. My question is for both of you, the joint task force that's been created between FERC and NARUC, do you feel that that's fulfilling the expectations to advance the ball here and arrive at some consensus? I've heard comments, frankly, on both sides of that, and would welcome your thoughts.
Well, I would say, certainly from my perspective, both I was, in industry when it got started and now DOE, I see great value in it. I think the discussions have been really robust. I think the state commissioners that have a seat at the table there have been really deeply engaged. And I've had a bunch of conversations with them in my new role at DOE that have been really in depth and have helped them think about how they can shape all of this, right? It's been interesting. I've actually been almost a year in this job. I keep calling it new, but the number of conversations I've had with states that have been so much different than when I was at FERC I think I left in 2015. I always say that I think states felt like transmission was something that sort of happened to them in those days. And now they're really actively thinking about, how do I shape this outcome for my consumers and for my state's clean energy goals or whatever goals they have. And so I think the task force, I think it was great. I think it was a great idea by you, Rich, to start it. We've been supporting it, and I think we'd like to continue to do so. I'm sure it'll evolve. All things evolve, but yeah.
Yeah, I would just say it depends on what you expect out of it, right? I think the dialogue is really, I think, has been amazing. And the state, Jeff's exactly right. The state regulators come incredibly prepared. They take it very seriously. They plan in advance of the meetings. For commissioners, not so much. But that's in part because of part of that is the ex parte restrictions and not just the public meeting restrictions. You can't have conversations with more than one commissioner at a time outside the public. But nonetheless, I think the dialogue has been incredibly helpful. When I mentioned the earlier example of inter-regional transfer capacity, that is something that I think if we hadn't had such a vigorous dialogue on that in the one meeting about a year ago with the state regulators, I don't think it would have been an issue as high on FERC's agenda as it probably is today.
Peter?
For Rich Glick, if you could design a federal policy on gas grid coordination with Winter Storm Elliott in mind, what would the federal authority be?
You mean siting, or you mean just in general the coordination?
From a resilience standpoint,
So
and the dependability of the gas supply for generation.
I'll throw out a couple of quick ideas, and it is, for those of you that haven't read it yet, I would strongly recommend reading the NASB, the recent NASB report on gas electric coordination, because it really does make some very strong and bold recommendations about how this, and it's such an important issue from a reliability perspective going forward. But just quickly, one of which is, Chairman Phillips mentioned this recently, I think at a public meeting, that it would be the establishment of a gas reliability entity similar to the ERO, the Electric Reliability Organization, that NERC fills today. I think we definitely need that on the gas side. Secondly, though, and this is where, in the past, this has been going on for over a decade, right? There's been lots of meetings about gas electric coordination, and to the extent they could agree on nomination hours and so on, there's been some movement. But where there hasn't been agreement, there hasn't really been a regulator who stepped in and said, I'm going to do something about that. We need to move forward because this issue is getting worse and reliability is becoming more endangered. So I think FERC, and it's easy for me to say this now because I'm not at FERC, but FERC needs to step in, I think, and to the extent it has jurisdiction, it has at least jurisdiction over interstate pipelines. It doesn't have jurisdiction over all pipelines. Take more aggressive action in terms of making sure that there is more of a coordinated effort between electric generators, whether it has to do with the fact that electric traders are around all the time and gas traders go home over the weekend, things like that. I think there are actions that FERC probably can take and should take to ensure better coordination between the two industries.
So I'm going to bring it back to a couple questions that I have. My coffee's been sitting here. I don't think it's steamed up the crystal ball. So I'm going to ask couple questions that are sort of forward-looking. And this is not a simple one, although not many of these really are. I want to ask you about, study after study is showing that we're going to need to double or triple the size of the grid over the next 2 or 3 decades, either because of trying to meet ambitious clean energy goals or mandates. We're seeing rising demand and need for load. There are all kinds of electrification issues pushing this. So that's that on the one hand. But then if you look at, it's taken over 100 years for us to get to where we are today on the grid, and we have to double or triple it in a third of that time. Are we even being realistic about the ability to achieve that kind of a goal in that time frame? And if we are, how do we get there?
It's a tall task. I'm not going to sit here in my federal position and say we got all the answers. I mean, it is definitely a tall task. But when I think about whether it's doable, I think about a couple of things. One is, this isn't our statistic, but there's a statistic out there that basically says, you know, we've, the last 5 or 10 years or so, I think we've increased the grid. It's something over 1% year over year, and we've got to basically double that, go over 2%, right? But if you look historically, there are times when we've expanded the grid at greater than 2% per year. You know, there have been spurts where that has happened historically. So that's one data point I look at. The other one is a recent one, and I'm looking at my notes because I want to get it right. But you know, we looked at our 3 projects we supported in TFP and compared them to the needs we found, the regional transmission needs we found in the needs study. And so Southline, that's from New Mexico to Arizona. The needs study estimates that that region will need about 935 gigawatt miles of transmission to unlock the power sector emission savings in the IRA. The Southline project alone contributes 14% to that. So that's one project, right? Many more to do, but that's a pretty significant chunk. Similarly, the cross-tie project that we conditionally selected, 14% of regional need in that region. And same story for Twin States in the Northeast, where in the Northeast, we're looking more at interregional transfer capacity needs, and that's going to provide a significant opportunity for interregional transfer with Canada. So I look at those data points and sort of say to myself, with concerted effort from everybody, we're just one part of that. I think it's doable, yeah. Otherwise, I don't know if I get out of bed in the morning.
Rich, is it doable, or are we just kidding ourselves on this?
I think it's kind of a good news, bad news situation. On the bad news side, yeah, everyone knows that even under the best of circumstances, it takes almost a decade to build transmission from start to get a transmission project from start to finish completed. And so it's hard to, like, the numbers that you pointed out are very daunting, and it's really hard to imagine just that alone will that just willing it alone will get enough transmission to be done in the short term. Having said that, the good news is there's a lot more attention being paid to this issue, and there's a lot of effort, resources being put into it. We mentioned Congress, Department of Energy. I mean, think about the Department of Energy. I worked there for a couple years, a long time ago. I mean, the Secretary of Energy, all she talks about is transmission, which is great. I mean, she's amazing. And I think the fact is there's a much bigger focus than there ever has been on the need to put more resources into it. I think, though, to bridge the gap, though, there's got to be a lot more focus on the grid-enhancing technologies and also reconductoring and dynamic line ratings and everything else. That we need to take a look at how we can squeeze more out of the system to kind of reduce the overall, in the short term, the overall percentage need of additional capacity.
Okay, I've got one last question, okay? I don't want you to literally gaze into the wire's crystal ball, but I want you to think ahead. 6 months from now, what are we going to be talking about on transmission? What's going to be the big pressing issue that everybody in this room is going to be trying to grapple with?
I'm going to let you start. Deference to the chairman.
I mean, I think to stick with FERC, if I can, I think that to me the issue will be, people will be either wondering when the planning and cost allocation rule is going to come out, or if it's already out, people will start focusing on compliance, and as people are doing now on 2023, right? And so I think there's going to be a lot of consternation about what the rule means and how quickly the compliance process is going to take and things like that. So it's my guess is that'll be the main focus within 6 months.
What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to say. It feels like we're talking about every issue involved in transmission, like at an equal height of importance. I mean, I think for me, one of the things that I imagine we'll be talking a lot more about is just how states are engaging and how they're collaborating with each other on these problems as well. You're seeing states collaborate. You're seeing it in the West. You're seeing it in the Northeast, where states are really earnestly coming together now and saying, we need to work together to advance this, to advance the transmission grid in a way that will ensure reliability, ensure lowest costs, meet our policy goals. And I think that we'll be talking more about that. I think that so many people are seeing examples in MISO and in SPP where we're seeing regional transmission built. Those are places where there's strong state collaboration. I think other states are really seeing that and saying, we want to get in that game too. Certainly they're talking with us about it and we're finding ways to support them. And I think that'll be a bigger part of the conversation. And I think if there is a new FERC rule, I think that'll be a big part of the conversation too, is how states participate in that whole compliance process.
All right, well, thank you both very much for being here today. Appreciate your spending your time to talk to us about these important issues. And with that, we're going to go ahead and close out today's program. We do have lunch afterwards, so everyone please stick around. But in the meantime, join me in thanking both Rich Glick and Jeff Dennis for being here. Thank you.
That's so much fun.
It's good, yeah.
All right.
Don't forget your